We have accomplished something that I was trying to go back in my DMs and messages as to when I first reached out to this gentleman and quite literally ignored me. Only to fast forward and someone had DM'd me, was like, hey, this is his assistant. This is who you need to get in touch with. And his name is Chuck. And Chuck was on this podcast months ago. And I think we talked about it on the podcast, but I had messaged him and said, hey, I'd love for Mike to come on the show. And apparently he drafted a response to me that never got sent. And fast forward through years and years, and quite literally an email chain that I just pulled up that is 100 messages back and forth. Mr. Mike Rowe is joining us today on the podcast.
See, this is what people don't understand or see about the podcast, the amount of work on the back end.
It's 100 emails, man.
That's a lot. That's like when I first went into business, the amount of emails that I would send back and forth to like a potential client.
And the worst part is very last minute, I almost rescheduled this again. Mike was supposed to be on a couple months ago, and he had to reschedule, and then we nailed down this date. And I had a last minute family event pop up that I was like, hey, Chuck, do you think we could push this up an hour? He's like, let's just find another date. I'm like, forget it. I will.
Yeah.
I cannot go into the 200 email zone of trying to get this scheduled. So, yeah, I mean, Mike's I've had the opportunity to chat with him 2 years ago on an Instagram live. We had seen him at the Builder show this year at the Digs event. And today we're just going to have a good old conversation.
Yeah. He, obviously this was a long time coming, and probably unbeknownst to Mike, we've been trying to make this happen for an extremely long time. I know our listeners have been trying to make this happen. So definitely grateful for Chuck and for Mike for carving out some time for us and for our listeners. I wanted, like, Mike's just a true professional. So as much as we want to shape the conversation, like if he wants to steer the conversation in a direction, I was all for letting him do that. But I wanted the conversation with Mike to be different than most of the interviews and things that I've heard with him. I didn't want it to be a reiteration of what we've heard before. And it started off down a path that I did not anticipate, and we hit some things that I wanted to touch on, and we went in many different directions. But I'm sure that most of you can attest to the fact that you could listen to Mike Rowe talk about pretty much anything, and it's going to be interesting. But yeah, it was a really great opportunity. Grateful for the time, grateful for the insight, grateful for everything that he and his team are doing for our industry. So I hope that you all enjoyed this conversation, because I most certainly did. It was a fun one. But maybe we've peaked. I mean, I hope not. Maybe we can get them back on.
Oh, for sure.
Then we'll peak then. But I mean, if we peaked here, I'd be all right with it.
Guys, before we get into it, head over to moderncraftsman.co, top right corner, hit the subscribe button. It signs you up for our newsletter where we release a ton of additional info, not only just on the episodes, but about stuff we're working on in the background. And it's exclusive to anyone that's in or involved or signed up for the newsletter. So moderncraftsman.co, hit the subscribe button, top right corner, and you'll get the behind the scenes stuff. This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. Have you heard about the retractable patio door screens from Andersen? They're crafted to seamlessly blend with Andersen patio doors, and this screen is more than just an accessory, it's a statement piece.
Elevate your customers' outdoor experience with premium die-cast metal hardware and a high-end weather retention performance, ensuring lasting performance year after year. Choose from 11 different colors to perfectly match any aesthetic.
These screens are compatible with doors manufactured all the way from 1990 to the present, so upgrading a space has never been easier. Don't just settle for any screen. Impress with Andersen's retractable screen and redefine outdoor living. Learn more at andersenwindows.com. A common goal most builders have is to scale their business. And what a lot of them don't realize is achieving growth on their own is difficult and it takes time.
So I'm going to let you in on a little secret that most successful builders keep to themselves. You need to invest in technology if you want to grow fast and still have a life.
Take it from Tyler Farrell, owner of Killowen Construction, who went from building just one home per year to unlimited growth once he started using Buildertrend. Or Greg Hassler, owner of Hassler Homes, who brings in over $10 million worth of work per year thanks to their software.
If you're ready to unlock your potential like these industry giants, visit buildertrend.com/MC demo to see how Buildertrend can transform your business.
Homeowners trust you to get their projects done and to do them well, so it always helps when other industry experts have your back.
For over 80 years, Velux has been solely focused on developing innovative skylights trusted around the world. They've established themselves as the market leader in skylights by transforming spaces with natural light and fresh air.
Check out veluxusa.com/remodeler to find out how Velux brand can back your next build. Wait, in what sense?
Well, I'm still alive, man. I'm fogging a mirror. I've been walking around for 62 years. I just came back from an 8-mile morning ruck with exactly 65 pounds of dead weight on my back. And now I'm drinking what appears to be some horrific elixir of horse piss and turmeric.
What the
And
fuck is that?
you know what? My girlfriend made it. She
Oh,
just says,
okay.
she says, drink it. It'll make your fingernails thicker. I'm like,
Why
you
don't,
know what?
why don't
That's
you
good.
eat up and why don't you eat up and we'll tell you.
That's
You gotta be careful. I never drink anything that my wife tells me to drink.
Look, dude. I mean, you got to pick the hill you die on. You can't say yes to everything, but she goes to trouble to make you some orange thing, and it's just
You go
easier to
for it.
say thank you, dear. It's very thoughtful.
How
Is
long
it
you been
working?
rucking?
Is it working?
Yeah, actually, it's strange. I'm not home a lot, but it does. I think it's probably bullshit, but I think it made my hair thicker, and my fingernails longer.
Why
I
why why exercise? That's I think what Nick was getting to.
well,
Oh,
yeah. How long have you been rucking?
uh, about a year, maybe 14
Oh wow.
months. Yeah, you know Mike Easter?
The name sounds
Not
familiar.
Michael Easter wrote a book. I got it around here somewhere. It was called The Comfort Crisis.
Oh
And
yeah.
yeah, so he was an outdoor journalist, writer guy who got challenged to go on a caribou hunt with a guy
Mhm.
named Donnie Vincent, who is hardcore off the grid, eat what you kill, you know. And so he went 32 days up in the Arctic Circle and was miserable in every way a man can be miserable. But broke his misery down into like 20 chapters and then wrote about the upside of discomfort and killing a caribou and walking it back to camp and carrying 80 pounds for 2 days on the tundra, which is
Mhm.
basically just code for basketball sized tuffets of frost covered snot. You know, it's like it's just so. Anyway, it's just opens the door to the benefits of carrying heavy weight for long distances, which is our only real skill as an animal. You know,
Mhm.
it's the one thing we can do that the others can't. Um, and then I read a bunch of stuff with SEALs and special forces who were doing this kind of thing, and just thought, you know, I walk every morning for 8 miles. I might as well put 30 pounds on, and then
Yeah.
40, and then 50.
Are you doing it
Yeah,
by yourself?
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
listen to music or anything?
I do everything. So some of it's music, but mostly it's phone calls, right? Trying to figure out the day. But there's a great hack in the podcast world that I'm sure you've discovered regarding prep, and that
Mhm.
involves listening to the person you're going to be interviewing be interviewed somewhere else.
Hmm.
Yeah.
and so and so I'll do that often, and of course books on tape, all the normal stuff. So you said, am I alone? No, not really. It's just me and 1,000 voices in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I started running a couple of years ago, and I like struggle between, do I want to listen to music? Do I want to listen to nothing? Do I want to listen to podcasts? And I find myself bouncing between the three, and some days, but like, I guess there's something to be said for not having any sort of stimulation. Like, you're supposed to be getting to that flow state where you're completely disconnected, but it also just seems like such a good opportunity to, put some work in, or something more constructive.
That's a thing now. It's called raw dogging.
Yeah.
I have seen that,
I
like
mean, it
planes and
sounds
stuff.
like weirdly sexual, but I think it's just the expression of like getting on a cross country flight and just sitting there
Yeah.
with your
Watching the map.
thoughts. No,
Yeah.
no
I
computer,
feel like that's a little
nothing.
bit different. I, I'm not for that at all. But there is sometimes, like, if you're out there and you're exercising, you're supposed to be in tune with your body and everything else, like not having any of those outside influences or distractions to
Yeah.
really understand what you're doing and like modulate your heart rate and control your breathing and all of that, I think is probably useful in some sense.
Easter talks about that too. One of the way he puts it is one of the forms of discomfort that really didn't exist generations ago, but is keenly um, present today is boredom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, our inability to deal with being bored, or I
Yeah.
guess maybe more accurately, to function without constant stimulation.
Hmm.
And he talks about being dropped off on a glacier from this tiny little plane, so small it had to fly back to get the other guys. So he's alone. As far as he can see, is nothing but, you know, wasteland, white. And there's nothing to read. There's nothing to do except maybe think about what he would do if a polar bear showed up. And he said, you like go through the 5 stages of grief in 15 minutes. Like when you really have
Mm.
absolutely nothing to do, nothing to look at, nothing to nothing to stimulate you at all. Uh, it's kind of terrifying if you're not
Yeah.
used to it.
Yeah.
You know?
I think about my kids in this, like,
Dude.
I had a conversation that we were doing something and I came in, I shut the TV off and I'm like, guys, no, like we're just gonna chill. And my 6-year-old goes, I'm bored.
Mhm.
I'm like, hey, it's like you gotta learn to be bored. He goes, what why? And I didn't know how to answer him. And I was like, because there you don't always have to be doing something like and I kind of went down this rabbit hole of like sounding like my father, like, oh, when I was your age we didn't have this, that, and the other thing. And and I knew like my reasoning was backed on like good data, just I didn't know what that data was.
Yeah.
I feel
And
like the
yeah,
stimulation is like a distraction from
right.
everything else, right? Where it's like, even if I had nothing to do and I didn't have my phone, I'd probably have to think about my life and what I could do differently and how I could be a better person. And it's like, no, I'm just going to pull my phone out and then I don't have to think about it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what you call Kierkegaard 101, the unexamined life, right? And
Mm,
and he who I think it was Nietzsche, he who stares into the abyss should be careful because he might, see himself staring back, basically. Yeah, we
mm,
don't want to do that. We don't want to spend more time than we have to thinking about all of our, mistakes and what might have been and what could have been. But by the same token, if you're really like it, would you call it the flow? Maybe there's some music in the background, but if you're really not focused on any one thing, then your brain will slip into that mode where it
yeah.
starts to seek instead of receive and process. And that's, on a creative level anyway. I mean, this probably happened to you on the job, right?
Hmm.
Like you're trying to find a solution for a thing. And the trick or the trap is that you often find yourself just staring at the problem and thinking about what is the solution. And, you get deeper and deeper into it when really you need to look off to the periphery sometimes, or like let your mind go someplace else. And then all of a sudden, the reptilian part of your brain, right, taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, dummy, you know, it's this." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, it was right in front of me the whole
Yeah.
time."
I think
Yeah.
that work for a long time did provide somewhat of a flow state, but I don't know if it was the healthiest outlet for a while. Like I think that I was using work to distract myself. I guess it relates back to what you said with boredom and my trouble with school and academia in general was that just I was so bored and I couldn't handle being bored. And then I found working with my hands and it created such an outlet for me. But
Mm.
I think that I went like on the polar opposite end of the spectrum where I was all in and like nothing else mattered.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's super interesting to me because I think the adjacent trap to that is once you find this thing that makes sense to your brain and to your hands and so forth, then we just heap so much expectation onto it. So like now suddenly our work has to satisfy everything. It's got to
yep.
satisfy my
Yeah.
hobby, it's got to satisfy this, it's got to. And we do that all the time. It's like to really go back to what we first started talking about. Some days you listen to music. Some days you listen to podcasts. Some days it's a book on a tape. Some day maybe you just say, you know what, I got 2 hours. I'm rucking. I haven't talked to this guy, this woman, this friend in like 6 months, right? So this idea that you fall into a routine where it's okay, this is my ruck bag and this is the weight. Those two things never change. This is my route, right? That's never going to change. This is my playlist. This is and then pretty soon you're just so freaking boring, man.
Mhm.
Talk about boredom. When you get bored with your own routine,
Yeah.
uh, and you look
Yeah.
around, who do you blame for that? Well, that'd be you.
A couple years ago, I remember coming home and like I was visibly stressed out, and I remember my wife saying, You're bored." I'm like, "What do you mean I'm bored? I'm literally like have a million things going on. She goes, Nick, you have been waking up at the same time every single day, doing the same morning routine, going to the same gym, going like everything is exact same over and over and over." And I didn't change, for the record, but I was more aware of it, and I started looking at opportunity to understand, what was the benefit of me doing that, and
Yeah.
finding a deeper or a deeper reason as to like why do I wake up at the same time every day, and putting effort into it outside of just it it happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the God, I can't believe I'm going to quote Tony Robbins with respect, but I mean, you're talking about certainty and
Mm,
uncertainty, and the fact that they're not really opposites. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. And
yeah,
I'd really love to get your thoughts on how you balance that with your employees, with your workforce. How do you keep your people engaged? You have to give them enough certainty so that they're comfortable knowing they're secure in their job, but you have to give them enough uncertainty that they don't fall into the same patterns and routines and rhythms, because all that stuff, never mind boredom, that fosters something that's a lot more dangerous, and that's complacency, especially on the
yeah,
job site. So I don't know. I think the way Tony put it was, as as humans, we need the certainty that comes from knowing the sun is going to rise every morning. If we're
mm,
constantly thinking that tomorrow is promised to no one, we're paralyzed. We can't do anything. But we also need the uncertainty, which is just another word for variety, in knowing that no two sunsets are going to be the same, or no two sunrises, and
mm,
no 2 days, right? So to have enough certainty slash security in your life, in your work, in your home, but at the same time to have enough uncertainty slash variety to give you the presence of mind to say, you know what? I walked with 40 pounds yesterday. Today I'm walking with 65. That's a big jump. And I don't know exactly how it's going to impact me, slow me down, mess my time up, and so forth. So
Mm,
I just think that it's one of the, I'm probably saying something just screamingly obvious, but as a manager, as a boss, as a husband, as a dude, you know, what do you guys do on a daily basis not to fall into the rut that's going to take you to complacencyville? Because that's nowhere you want to be.
I feel is it's more like the quest for certainty, or you're chasing certainty, and then it's almost at least from my perspective. Once I get there, I need uncertainty to try and chase that certainty again. Where it's like it's never enough, right? I want it to be this way. I want it to be easy. I can't wait until I get to this point in my life or this point in my career or business. Once I have this, it'll be good enough. And then you get there, and it's like, well, this is too easy. Now I have the complacency, and I'm not engaged enough. Now I need more uncertainty in my life and more stress in my life to get me going again.
Right.
Which
Right.
is like this vicious cycle where I'm like, you're chasing and longing for something, and then once you get it, you realize that that's not quite enough, and then, or maybe that's just like my addictive personality.
Well, that's called the hero's journey, dude. And people have
mm,
been writing operas about it and epics about it and Broadway musicals. Pippin is it's the whole thing. It's the quest for it's greener grass, you know? And man, think about what that does to the workforce. Think about that,
yeah.
like you want ambition in your people. You want hunger. You want initiative. But it's those very things that are also going to take your key people off the reservation, looking for something better somewhere
Mm.
else. It's such a pain in the ass and an eternal struggle to both attract the talent that you need and then to keep them.
It's funny, Mike. You say like you described who we were to everyone else, right? Like as a husband, as a manager, but you didn't describe like what I am to myself. And I think when I think about uncertainty versus certainty, I look at, you know, I internalize a lot, and I
Mm,
think that for me, the uncertainty is all internalized. So I deal with that completely by myself. And externally, as a manager, as a husband, as a father, I am all certainty and I am all confidence. And I am, this is going to work. There is absolutely no way this doesn't work.
hmm
And, and I don't think, like, I say that knowing that that's not healthy. And I know we have this issue in our industry and in the world as we know it of mental health. And I know that what I'm describing is something that leads people down a path of mental health issues. But for me, that is how I've always dealt with it. I've just looked at it as though my job is to allow everyone to know and believe in what I'm doing, and internally like I might question myself, but I always pair that with the only way this doesn't work is if I give up, period.
hmm
Because everything has an opportunity to work, and that doesn't mean it works exactly the way I thought it would, but everything has an opportunity to work. It's just how willing am I to make it work, and that's for me to figure out, and not for me to ask advice of someone, or hey, what should I do here? Because for me, like I feel my entire life has been this chase of doing something bigger than maybe I'm supposed to, or this chase of doing something that people don't think is right, or there's an easier path here, and I've just never been attracted to that.
So that's the
And
imposter syndrome, right?
a hundred
I mean,
percent.
I don't know any, but well, I know a few sociopaths who don't really suffer from it, but but most thoughtful people, at some point will take a long look in the mirror and go, "You again? God, you are so
Mm.
full of shit." Is anybody buying any of this? That's normal. But as you were talking, I was wondering, did you freelance in the trades for a time, or like before you put out your own shingle? What was the
Mm.
uncertainty like in terms of looking for work for you? Not for anybody else, but for you.
for looking for work,
Yeah,
I
and
don't.
look, as you formulate an answer, I'll just give you a quick example because I was thinking of this just the other day. I freelanced for 15 years before before I actually got a paycheck with any kind of regularity, and my months always started the same. I would turn the calendar over, and there'd be 30 blank squares, and the uncertainty of looking at 30 blank squares and the anxiety that came from God, I wonder how many I'm going to be able to fill. You know, it was constant, and it didn't matter how good a month I had. The next month,
Mhm,
that same kind of excitement slash dread, it was
mhm,
always there. And then one day I went back through old calendars, like years, earlier. I mean, I couldn't find a month that didn't have 20, 25 squares X'd out
yeah,
where I'd gotten work, right? So I just find that, the whole freelance mentality has always interested me, um, in entrepreneurs and especially in the trades, because I
mhm.
don't think we talk enough about that. The idea that, a person who's mastered a skill and is willing to go to where the work is in this industry really can write their own ticket. They just have to get over that feeling of 30 blank squares staring them in the face and all the uncertainty that comes with it.
And I think the majority of people are like the ones that can do the work, but very few are the ones that can stare at those blank pages and actually go out and fill those spaces. And that is something that, I mean, we all struggle with it. Even though I do it, I've never had a I've never looked at it in that manner, but it's something I think about constantly.
Yeah.
And I do remember a very specific conversation I had is, you know, I worked for my dad for 11 years. I went off and got into high rise project management. Worked there for 4 years. And I decided that I was going to give it up and go pursue carpentry. And I gave my notice to my job, and the job offered me a very significant bonus to stay for an additional 3 months.
Hmm.
And I consulted with a good friend of mine, my girlfriend, now wife, my father, and they all were like, just take the money, roll out another 3 months, and then start your business later. And I'm like, that seems to make sense, but I can't get on board with it. Like, why not just go make that money on my own? But I knew, like, I guess what my fear in that moment was that if I took that, I would go through 3 months and it would be another check, and
Hmm.
I would be in this hamster wheel of just being fed money because they needed me to stay. And I left and I started my company, and it was just me. I was just, doing carpentry projects for people. And I called my dad, and I forget, I think it was later that year. Yeah, it was later that year I got engaged, and I think the following year I got married. We bought a house, and then got pregnant in a very short amount of time. And I called my dad, and I'm like, Dad, I don't know if I can do this. He goes, do what? And he was like, first off, you're moving too quickly. Like, you're trying to renovate a house and your wife is now pregnant. But I was like, what if I don't have any more work? And he said to me, he goes, Nick, have you thought about the last 10 years of your life, and the fact that anytime you wanted to do something, you just picked up the phone and called someone and had a job? I was like, yeah, but what if that changes? He goes, why would that change? I'm like, I don't know. And I quote him often on these podcasts because I always say he gave me the best and worst advice, and it was always you'll figure it out. And I remember, like, being very very down, and probably on the verge of tears at one point when we were renovating our first house, because I literally was broke. I didn't know how I was going to survive that time. And I called him, and I really wanted like a man-to-man talk, and he was like, you'll figure it out. And I was so mad at him because I needed advice. And but I look back and I'm like, he was right. Like, it was probably better that he didn't give me advice, because I would have
Yeah.
he would have given me something and I would have chased it, and it wouldn't have been what I would have done.
We are in such a thrall. We so desperately want, you called it advice, but I think it's more like an instruction manual or
Yeah.
a survival guide
Yeah.
or, life for dummies. We've got it. So many parents, I think, have it in their minds, and so many employers as well, that there's a right way and a wrong way to handle all of these situations. And we don't know. We don't want to screw our kids up. And so, we know rationally that the best path for the most people can't possibly be a 4-year degree. It
Mm.
can't be. It's so expensive, and it's just so fraught with so much uh, drama, but we still push them.
Mhm.
We still push them in that direction. And it's not because we're stupid. It's because we don't know. There's no manual. All we know is we don't want to screw them up,
Mhm.
and we want them to have at least every advantage that we had or more.
Yeah.
And so we just default into these patterns and into these ruts. And so, you know, you look around and there's $1.7 trillion in student loans, and you guys are still having a hell of a time finding people who are enthused and willing to learn the trades. What last time we talked, I think for every five who retire,
One.
two replace, or less
Yeah.
than that now, maybe. So, yeah, I mean, it's just in the absence of certainty, no playbook, no punch list. You know, your old man probably learned at some point along the way that there's just no real value in indulging the doomsayers, because
Yeah.
they've never once been right. What if the sun doesn't rise? What if the earth does freeze? What if it gets too hot to live? What if it's never happened? At least
Mhm.
not since bipeds have been walking around. Sun always
It
comes up, always goes down. Yeah, I guess there's meteor here and there, and things happen in Pangea and so forth and so on. But in our lives, and in history, at least the history we can document and remember, the doomsayers have never gotten it right. Now that's a macro observation. On a micro
Right.
level, I always filled in my 30 squares somehow or another. We figure it out, and it's not luck, but nor is it completely um, expertise or competence. I think it's a combination of both, but mostly it's just showing up. It's just showing up every day, early if possible, and being of use and being curious, and hopefully hanging on to some sort of something like a sense of humor. You pick up the ruck, you put it on, you drink your orange stuff, you sit back and wait for your fingernails to grow. Hope
isn't
for the best.
I mean, this is like the entire conversation about certainty and uncertainty, and looking back on your career and your life, Mike. It I don't know if there is an answer when you do, like, I think when you first approach the 30 days and there's nothing there, there's a lot of anxiety around that. And there's a point in my career where I was okay with not knowing what was going to happen at the end of that 30 days. And I didn't necessarily do anything or put any tools or systems in place. It was maturation, it was experience and confidence that I would be able to sort that out. Was there a point in your life or your career when it wasn't necessarily about whether the 30 days was completely packed, or you had work or you didn't have work, that you just were confident in yourself and in your beliefs and in your systems and your potential, that you were going to make it all work?
Hmm. Well, I'll tell you what happened to me was 15 years of freelance. I loved it. Like I really loved it a lot. But when I looked back and saw that all of that dread about finding the work had never really metastasized or materialized, um, a really curious thing happened. I got, to bring it back to where we started, I got bored. I got bored with my model. And and just so your listeners understand, I got a little arrogant in
Mm.
my early days, like from 28 until 40. I freelanced really well in my chosen field. You know, I had a toolbox, and the tools in there allowed me to have a weirdly successful audition rate. In other words, I booked like like 1 in 3 auditions I booked. Didn't matter what it was. I was good at auditioning. So I was able to work on lots and lots of different jobs that I really didn't care about at all. I didn't
Mm.
put any real value. I didn't assign any value to the infomercial or to the nature doc that I was narrating or to the pilots for the sitcoms that I was doing or the occasional movie or the play where, I touched everything like it was hot. I didn't, it wasn't the work that was important to me. What was important was working when I wanted and then taking my retirement in early installments. So when I was in my 20s and 30s and really early 40s, I had a really interesting balanced life. I didn't swing for the fences like a lot of my friends in the industry did. I was happy looking for projects in Hollywood and New York that were so poorly conceived and so badly executed ultimately that no amount of luck or talent could have salvaged them. I would work on these turds, get paid, and then when they failed, I wouldn't be saddled with anything resembling a commitment. However, because I did a good job on the work, word got around and I had a good reputation. So the answer to your question is it was really easy for me to get hired on jobs that I didn't care about for a long time. And then the freelance world became less interesting when I realized that all of the anxiety that came was completely a fiction in my mind. I had nothing to
Yeah.
worry about at all. Looking back, it was clear. I could basically, I was in control of my own schedule, even though every month started with all those blanks.
Was all of that clear while you were in it though, or is this just like a reflection that you had
Mm.
after the fact where you
No,
realized?
man. What happens is I got complacent in my model and I needed something to to break that. And that something was a phone call from my mother, actually. I was working in San Francisco, right across the bay here at CBS, and I was 42, hosting a show called Evening Magazine. I may have told you about this, Nick. I don't remember, but it was a
Yeah.
hell of a day. This is a great gig, by the way. I would go out every night and shoot raps for this evening show that came on after the news. So I was the guy that would go like, to the museum opening or maybe to a winery up in Napa or to some opening of a play. And it's like, tonight on Evening Magazine, we bring you here and blah, blah, blah. And here's our first story. And I mean, it was a cushy little hosting gig. And, and I was in my cubicle one day and my mother called me from Baltimore and said, Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old yesterday. Um, her exact words were, he's not going to be around forever. And before I tell you this, I should tell you that my pop, he's the reason Microbe Works exists. He
Mhm.
only went to the 7th grade. He was a master electrician, steam fitter, pipe fitter, welder, carpenter, could build a house without a blueprint. He was that guy. My mother says, he's 90, not going to live forever. Wouldn't it be great, she said, if before he died, he could turn on the TV and see you doing something that looked like work? And that
It's
was it, dude.
cut to the chase.
I
Jeez.
mean, geez, mothers, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, devastating. And of course, she was right. She's always right. And I went to my boss and I said, hey, man, is there any reason that this show, Evening Magazine, can't be hosted from a place that looks like work? And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know, a construction site, a factory floor, a sewer. He's like, you want to host Evening Magazine from a sewer? I'm like, why not? He said, you know what? I don't care. Do whatever you want. Nobody's watching the damn show anyway. So I took my cameraman into the sewers the next day. And what happened down there is the subject of a book I wrote a few years ago. It totally changed my entire life. You know, I I was unable to do my job because of the roaches, because of the rats, a literal river of shit knocked me down countless times. It was the most inhospitable place to film ever, but it sure looked like work. And I wound
Mhm.
up meeting a sewer inspector down there. And because I couldn't do my job, I helped him do his. And my camera guy filmed it all. And when we looked at the footage, we saw something that I had never seen on TV before, which was a host being humbled by his environment and literally becoming an apprentice in real time, taking orders from a guy he didn't even know. And in the course of the conversation between me and the sewer inspector, Gene Cruz was his name, um, the viewer wound up learning all sorts of really interesting things about our infrastructure and about the construction of this incredible sewage system and all these things. It was totally inappropriate for Evening Magazine, but I put it on the air anyway. Um, and the feedback was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Uh, and it wasn't all great. You know, some people, they're sitting down trying to enjoy their meatloaf at 7 o'clock at night and they see this 42-year-old smartass crawling through a river of crap, making dick jokes and whatnot. It was not appropriate. But
Making my mom proud.
God, God help my
Hopefully.
mother. But here's the answer to your question. What happened when I let go of this idea that I'm a host who's paid to create the illusion of
Mhm.
competence and knowledge in these short, fake little TV bursts, which I'd been doing for 15 years and getting paid pretty well for doing it. When I let go of that and became this sort of avatar slash cipher slash apprentice, really a guest is the best word. When I started acting like a guest instead of a host, and when I saw that dynamic on this video, I I knew it was different. And when I got the feedback, it's not that people said, "Oh God, that was funny," or "Boy, that was interesting," or "That was gross or disgusting." Yes, they said all that, but the thing they really said that made me pay attention for the first time in my life and think differently about TV, they said, "You think that was dirty? You should meet my brother, my cousin, my uncle, my dad, my mom, my sister, my niece. Wait till you see what they do." And there was a lot of this, guys. A lot of people responded to that segment by saying, "Oh, yeah, I got that beat." And really, for the first time in my life, that made me think, you know something? It might be possible to do a TV show that I actually care about. Um, because if I can get away with being a guest instead of a host, and if I can turn the carpenter or the steam fitter or the pipe fitter or the sewage worker or the welder into the host of a show that actually has my name in the title, that's different, you
Mm.
know? And so I never looked at my calendar again in the same way. I sold that footage. Took me a while, but Discovery bought it. And when we put the pilot on the air, the same thing happened. Um, Overwhelmed with these ideas from viewers. So very quickly, it became clear that this was a format that the viewer could program instead of the network, that the subject could host instead of the host, right? No sets other than the workspace that was provided. No second takes ever. No script. That's not true. We did do some second takes early on, but I
To say
realized,
there was a whole like section at the end of the show. I think you had some second takes on.
well, we would show you stuff that we couldn't use in the show,
Yeah,
but
right.
but halfway through the first season, a really important thing happened, and I realized the show was either going to kill me or change my whole life, and
Mhm.
maybe change the topography of of cable TV, it seemed that it was pretty consequential, but we were doing it wrong. We were missing something.
Mm,
We were missing a level of honesty or authenticity, I guess would be better. And so I hired a behind the scenes camera, basically
mm,
just called it like a truth cam. And I said, look, your job is just to document the making of the show. Just always be wide, never stop rolling, and make sure the crew, I want to get to know the crew through this camera. And I also want to be able to turn to this camera whenever I feel like it to tell the viewer what's going right and what's going wrong and what's frustrating, right? It became kind of like a confessional,
mm.
and that hadn't been done before. And that dynamic allowed the show to explode. That's a very long answer to your question, but when I realized I was a better guest than a host, I s- I the whole freelancing thing felt a little different. And when I realized that, my mom actually had given me some excellent advice. Do something that looks like work and own it, really lean into it. That's the that's when my life changed. That's when I actually started caring about the stuff I was making, like
It's
actually cared about it.
it's interesting because the catalyst for that entire like directional shift with your life was very concrete. That came from your mom saying, do something. But then, like, from a contradictory perspective, you actually did less. Like, you didn't manifest that into happening, right? You like let go of your standards and what you were doing, and that created the show that actually made more sense than you. So that's a difficult lesson to teach someone, where it's like, hey, sometimes you have to let go when everything that you see in nowadays is like, do it this way and it's going to create this life for you, when you're here saying, like, sometimes you actually have to step back and let go and let things just happen in order to be successful.
Less here, more here.
Mm,
It's not as simple as just do less or do more. You
yeah,
have to you have to somehow find it's a scale, right? Every action equal opposite reaction. I I needed I needed to let go of the idea. I mean, not to get all super, on the couch about it, but I Uh, it wasn't quite arrogant. It was kind of haughty, like I was 42. That
Yeah.
that gig I described, yeah, I was going to keep it for a few months. I'd come and I'd go, and but I had the confidence that comes when you think you've like cracked a code or
yeah.
figured out something that a lot of other people in your industry hadn't. And rather than just be grateful for that, I, you know, I kind of felt my puny little chest puff up with pride, right? It's like, I've got this code cracked. I can work when I want, blah, blah, blah. And you know, it really did work for me. It was a wonderful business model right up until I realized that the trade had always relied or required me to not care much about the project.
Mm,
And Nick, can you imagine building a custom home, going in with the attitude that you're not going to care too much about the finished product, right? You can't, you know, you can get away with it for a while, but
yeah.
it's not a thing you want to build a reputation on. And
No,
it's not a thing you want to talk about in the context of, pride. Like my dad would be proud. My granddad, would
yeah.
my grandfather be proud of these shows? He was proud of Dirty Jobs, but
Mhm.
he didn't know what the hell to make of my career prior to that. Home
I
shopping, the
I
opera. What are you doing? Who is this guy?
But I feel like in retrospect, everyone just wants to create the story that this was the direction that they chose, and like they were along this path, and there was this very linear path, when sometimes it's just happenstance.
Dude, half these books behind me are written by people who are just dying to tell you how they did it.
It's just made
mm,
up.
Let me tell you how I did it. That's
yeah,
why, when I quote guys like Robbins, I pull my punches a little bit because I mean, what better proof that the country's dying for an instruction manual
Right.
than the proliferation of every self-help book ever written. And if it's not a self-help book, it's somebody who who rose to a point of influence or interest, and now they're going to look back and look. I'm just mindful of this. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to write a memoir, at least not in a traditional way, and I certainly don't want to tell you how I did it if it doesn't allow me to just tell you the truth of the fact that I
Right.
did it really all wrong for a long time.
I mean,
And
the worst part is it's not even how I did it right now, it's how I'm doing it. Like, because there's such an instant, like the immediacy of it, people aren't even getting done it and then learning from it. Like, they're teaching you as they're doing it and as they're making it up, which is even worse and
yeah,
dangerous.
oh man, look, I mean, it's like drinking from a fire hose when you look
Oh my God.
around.
Yeah.
Like all, I mean, everybody has a key. Everybody
Hmm.
has a solution. Let me tell you how over here on my YouTube channel or my
Hmm.
Instagram, or is it my Snapchat, or is it this or the Facebook? It's like everybody with something to say is saying it.
Hmm.
And, you know, I'd like to tell you that I saw that coming 20 years ago. Um, I didn't, but as it turns out, the headlines kind of caught up with my new model. And by that, I mean, we were leaving the age of uh, authority and hosts and people who talk like this all the time and look into the lens with extraordinary earnestness and tell you that's the way it was. August 14th. It's like, now all that was starting to change. We were evolving from this, I call it the age of authority, into the age of authenticity, where you've got, new levels of vulnerability that can actually be very persuasive. We used to think that the submissive posture and saying, "Hey, I don't know." Nick, you were talking about it earlier. I put on a brave face. I let my people know this is what's happening. Nothing to worry about. Don't worry.
Hmm.
Nick's on the case. Blah blah blah. Well, there are times when people need to hear that for sure, but there are also times, and I think we're living in one right now, where wouldn't it be nice if a politician actually like looked into the lens and said, "Look, I'll be honest with you, I don't know,"
Yeah.
or "I actually
Hmm.
haven't thought as deeply about that as I wish I had, but I will, and I'll get back to you." Wouldn't it be nice to see a journalist, you know,
Yeah.
just embrace that same level of humility, or a scientist even,
What?
So
There's always like
There
there's
has to
always
be.
an answer, right? Like
that's
you
right.
can't leave it open ended. I think, I mean, Mike, just to relate this, like for you're talking about your situation, and I think where I relate to this is that I balance between these two thoughts, and the one thought being, what's the worst that can happen? If I do this, like what is the worst? And I'll play it out loud. I'll talk it out loud. Like, hey, what if this fails? What if I lose a ton of money? What if I lose my house, sell my house, lose my car? Like let's go all the way down to, okay, I lose everything. I'm in millions of dollars of debt. I have to move in with my in-laws. It's like, all right, where is that where it stops? It's like, okay, like that sucks. Like there's no other way around that. That sucks. But I'm still alive and I still have my experiences, and truthfully, I could rebuild. I have no idea what my mental state would go through because I've never been through that. But then I balance it with, well, like, and my thought process there is like, so I should take the risk. I should go after what I truly want to do, regardless of anyone and everyone telling me don't do this. But then I
Mm.
balance it with, I'm gonna die. Like none of this really matters. And I think your comment about like building the house, building a custom home and not really caring about it. It's like, does it really matter that I make this project exactly the way I want? Because eventually I'm just gonna die and no one's gonna give a shit anyway.
Mhm.
And for me, I lean on the side of what's the worst that's gonna happen, like almost always. And especially if I'm like talking about my thought process out loud. Like that's how I make decision, and I back it with, if it fails, it's because I give up. And if someone pressures me on that, like, yeah, if I give up, that, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with giving up. And I've made that clear. It's like there are times that you should give up. And there's this
Absolutely.
like mentality around, like, if you give up, you're a failure. It's like, but is that our, like, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with not doing something or changing it? Like, we do this every single day. And for me, I think for a lot of people, it's like that constant push and pull of
Yeah.
understanding, like, when do I take these risks, or when do I slip into something more comfortable? And you and I have talked about AI in many of our conversations, and I've been thinking about this recently, and you actually said it to me on when I was on your podcast, is that what's wrong with being uncomfortable? What is, like, why are we trying to make everything so easy and comfortable? And you caught me off guard with that comment, and I've thought about that a lot, and I realized, like, if you think about the decisions I've made in my life and how they were pretty much the opposite of what I was given guidance on, if I had, for simplicity's sake, AI tell me what I should do, I would have followed the path of everyone else. And you think about the most successful companies and people, and you read these stories about, like, they did something that they believe so deeply in, regardless of the pushback and the barrier that others put in front of them.
Yeah. So what do we make of it? You know?
Hey guys, real quick, we'll get back to talking to Mike in a second, but this is the last chance you guys have to join us in Boston, September 27th through the 30th, for the Contractor Coalition Summit. This one's special because it's in my hometown. We're also going to visit our 45 White Oak project. But even more importantly, that this is the 6th event. Tyler's joining us at this event, and it's going to be more packed with information. There's a ton of information at contractorcoalitionsummit.com. Walks you through the entire schedule. This is more than just about education. This is about networking. This is about being around like-minded people. But we want you to be there. And the hotel block is closed, so you're going to lose out on that discounted rate. But to make up for that, we do have a discount code. So on checkout, fill in MC, for Modern Craftsman, for $1,000 off that ticket price. I hope to see you there. If you guys have questions, you know how to find us on Instagram. Feel free to reach out with any questions. But again, last chance to sign up and join us at the Contractor Coalition Summit here in Boston.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
How many people listen to this podcast?
2, 3.
You're rounding up.
Just the three of us, maybe Chuck.
Trust me, he won't listen.
I mean,
just the three of us.
A couple 100,000 a month.
Okay. That's a lot of people, It's a lot of people. And the point I was getting at earlier was, when you're in an age of experts, and when you can't really expect a room full of experts to agree, it begs the question, well, what do we do when the experts don't agree? Like, what we need right now, and the reason I'm happy to be on this podcast with you is because while you are an expert of sorts in what you do, you're also a curator. You're also in the world, looking around, trying to weigh and measure the value or the influence of any number of experts in any category. And when you find one that you like, you invite them on, and then we have this conversation that a few 100,000 people listen to. But for me, and I don't know if this has happened to you yet, but I assure you it will if it hasn't, you're going to realize that there's no way 200,000, 300,000 people are all needing to hear the same advice, the same insight, the same knowledge. What the heck? Am I getting a FaceTime call? That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen there. You guys still there?
We're here. Yeah.
I don't know what the heck that was. Who would call me on FaceTime in the middle of a point like that? My God, I wish I could turn that off. Anyway,
I was hoping it was your mom. And
yeah,
you
no, it
just
wasn't
hop
my. You know, Michael, wouldn't it be great if you did a podcast that had 1 million listeners? Wouldn't that be amazing? No, I mean, my point is, we're like those people are like visitors in a museum, and
Mm,
they're surrounded by all kinds of art and all kinds of pieces that they don't understand. They need a docent, they need a curator, and when I realized that I was in that position for whatever reason, way leads on the way, and now there are 7 million people on a Facebook page who are asking me questions. Aaron Burnett just called me right before we got on this call over at CNN. Would you come on tonight? She says. And I said, why? She goes, just to, you know, talk about which candidate is speaking to the
mm.
working class most effectively.
Can't on the Modern Craftsman
Yeah.
podcast.
Can't do it, Aaron. Can't do it.
Sorry.
Prior commitment.
More important things.
But look, I mean, it is more important because the people listening to this are going to be more like-minded and more focused, I think.
Yeah.
And selfishly, they're going to be able to help me accomplish some goals that I'm sure we'll talk about in a couple minutes. But in the meantime, I'm just like, well, who the hell is the working class exactly? Who is that? Where are they? What do they look like? Do you know them? How many are there? And I said, look, this is why I'm probably not going to come on the show, because microworks is the opposite of a political convention. A political convention is macro works. This is where the people who want to be elected talk in platitudes and bromides and tropes, and they try and address the college educated or the working class or the young moms or the blah, blah, blah. And it's like all these groups, we get broken down into these groups, and then we get fed this constant drip, drip, drip of platitudinous advice that most of us don't think about too much. But you just said it, Nick. Like, quitting is sometimes a really smart thing to do.
Mhm.
If you look at the platitudes on the walls, those successories, we've all seen them. You'll see one that says like perseverance or stay the course, and it's a bunch of guys, rowing in a shell or something in perfect harmony and staying the course. I'm like, yeah, come on, man. Staying the course makes great sense if you're headed in the right direction.
Right.
But if you're not, how about don't stay the course? So who in this
Quit. Try again.
quit, stop it. Stop it. If the universe is going to send you a message, maybe listen, right? So I don't have any idea who in this audience of 200,000 or 300,000 people needs to be encouraged to quit or needs to be encouraged to stay the course. I have
Mhm.
absolutely no idea. And if I go on CNN to talk about which candidate I think is best addressing the concerns of the working class, then all of a sudden that's me going, oh, I do have an idea of what these people as a group need to hear. And the
Right.
truth is, I have no freaking idea at all. What I do believe is that groups are still made up of individuals, and that every individual is on their own weird certainty, uncertainty, oh my God, 30 blank squares path. They're all trying to figure it out, and they're all at different places. And so in the end, what you just have to choose what matters. Uh, a meritocratic world matters to me. Um, Individualism matters. The choice to look at all of the available options from trade school to college to entrepreneurship to freelancing to an employee to an employer. I don't want to talk to the working class. I want to talk to men and women who are trying to figure out where they are in their own hamster wheel and
Mhm.
whether or not they want to speed up pick up the ruck, put on some more weight, take out a few pounds, mix up their route a little bit. I mean, you could fill a book with what I don't know.
Mhm.
And, you know, that's a long way of saying that the the opportunity you guys have is real, you know, and people are anxious for that user guide. They're anxious for a good docent. They're anxious for wisdom. But we just have no way of knowing who's
No,
actually listening.
I think there's a lot of similarities between like the approach that you take and what you do and what you kind of stumbled upon with, right? You're a storyteller at the end of the day, but I think that you're not necessarily authoring and creating that narrative as much as like being the conduit for the people who are actually there to tell their story, and then it's whoever's listening at that point can take what they want from it. And I think that the other side of the coin is the more of, hey, hop on the news. We want to create a narrative and we want you to speak for all of these people, where we don't want to do that on the podcast. And when we have a guest that comes on where it is that pitch and it's just all too convenient, it doesn't make sense to be that successful and never struggle. That's when we have a hard time with the podcast. But when we have people on who just want to come and tell their story and we want to provide the platform to do so, I think that it does create a better community and a more successful podcast. And I think that that's probably a reason why. I mean, I'm sure that you have not completely absolved yourself from the scrutiny that other people who have like a strong political or socioeconomic stance have. But when I look at you, it's like, how many people can disagree with this because you're not necessarily speaking to facts that are personal to your experience as much as, hey, I'm just sharing what I'm seeing.
Hmm. Well, the answer is quite a few can disagree. You know, I mean, it's a hell of a lot easier these days to judge than think. And
But what can they disagree with? Like what's the biggest argument?
well, that's a good question. I mean, modesty aside, you're kind of right. People don't often like. I had this. I forget where it
Like
was. I
what's
was.
your agenda? You're not looking to get like elected to
I'm not looking to
office,
get
like
elected. I'm not looking to get dirty jobs back on the air. I'm, I have an agenda with MicroWorks, and I'd like to help close the skills gap and challenge people to think differently about the definition of a good job as well as a worthwhile education. Now, those things are adjacent to a lot of political hot buttons. In fact,
absolutely.
labor and education are, look, in a world where everything's politicized, certainly those two things are.
Right.
But right, and so yeah, I get invited on to a lot of outlets and I get pulled in to something that feels pretty political. But look, you're right. uh, Very few people uh, hit me up later and say, man, how'd you get your head so far up your ass on that point? Right, that it's not about that. What happens more often than not, first first happened in 2000, I think it was 2015 or 2016, where in 1 week I went on Bill Maher's show, Real Time. Uh, had a great interview with Bill around the foundation and our work ethic scholarship program, and why I thought the trades had been relegated to some sort of vocational consolation prize. 2 days later, I had the exact same conversation. Uncanny how close it mirrored my conversation with Bill with Glenn Beck. Now, when you appear on Bill Maher and Glenn Beck in close proximity, you do something that the universe is not really quite prepared to handle. At least the Facebook world and YouTube, and a lot of people there who really truly support me and agree with the foundation, uh, simply couldn't square the fact that I was sitting that close to the Antichrist. And you can fill in the blank with whoever your Antichrist is, right?
Mm.
And and so, how could you, Mike, my friends on the right, just how could you sit there with Bill Maher and have a conversation like that? I'm like, well, I'll tell you why, because 8 million people were listening, and I think I would like for them to know that at least I'm out there with an option that might help them. Yeah, but Bill, that's no good. Same thing on the left. Glenn Beck, how could you sit there? How could you? So like suddenly I realized that, you know something, I'm going to get some pushback on a lot of things, but it's not going to be on substance. It's
Yeah.
going to be on geography and proximity to the other guy.
So the issue is you saying yes, not to both, not necessarily to like what you're speaking to.
So there's that, and there's one other thing that I think is worth knowing, and it's I would call it our collectively we've lost our nuance. You know, we've lost our ability to see people as like really multifaceted, complicated folks. You know, like we're so under the sway of the identity that's been sold to us through a podcast or through a television show or through a book. For instance, if you're a casual watcher of Dirty Jobs, and over the last 20 years, you've seen me in dozens of environments with hardworking men and women using tools and doing things, um, that that forms a very powerful association in your mind, and so you start to form some opinions about me. Maybe you think I can build a house without a blueprint like my granddad. Maybe you think I'm Mr. Handy. Maybe you think I can fix this or that, because the optics are so strongly reinforcing that. But what happens then when you learn later that I sang in the opera for 6 years, or that I sold tchotchkes on QVC, or that I had maybe 300 other jobs that are completely inconsistent with the identity that you formed as a result of seeing me on the one show that became video wallpaper? What then, you know? So I think there was a time not so long ago when if you learned something that challenged your idea of somebody in the public eye, or maybe contradicted something you assumed, that made them more interesting. And you would go, "Oh, I had no idea. Tell me more." Today, that doesn't happen. Today, it's like, "Oh, wait a second. Wait a second. Are you telling me that the Dirty Jobs guy sang in the opera? Well, what a bullshitter. He must have been
Yeah.
fake in one of those places. So which is he?" It's so silly, but we do it all the time. And part of it goes back to the podcast conversation, because this is a long form opportunity to talk about damn near anything. If I go on Aaron Burnett's show tonight, I have 4.5 minutes to sum up which candidate I think is doing a better job in addressing the hopes, dreams, and concerns of the modern day proletariat. It's insane. Who could possibly come out of that miasma and feel as if they contributed something of value to however many people are watching her? Which, by the way, is probably about the same size as your podcast, right? I mean, there are a lot of people, or enough people anyway. Hundreds of thousands of people are watching. Why do I want to just wade into that and take 5 minutes? It takes me 5 minutes to say hello. What am I going to say of value in that moment? This thing, and the thing that interests me, I mean, Podcast Landia has become a pretty crowded space. I think there are 4 million of them now. I get it. It's that fire hose we were talking about, but it's an opportunity to have an intelligent conversation for an hour or two or more. And the odds of being understood in a format like this versus the odds of being understood damn near anywhere else, it's laughable. This thing we're doing right now, I mean, it could be from the sublime to the ridiculous, but it matters. It matters because people are listening, and we are given the chance to make a case, to be persuasive. We're given the time to do that. So, it's a good thing.
There's I think it was Neil Strauss that said unspoken expectations are premeditated resentment. And I've always found that quote to be super interesting in relationships.
Say it again.
You think about unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments.
I can agree.
That's
And I
great.
think about like you know, a marriage or a girlfriend, like, or, you sit there and you have a fight, right? And then you go off and you think about that fight and how it might unfold. And next thing you know, you're just super mad. And you're like, and none of this actually happened. What you were just talking about in terms of like the people, the way they see you through dirty jobs and then find out you sang in the opera, it's like they've built this expectation of you. And now, like, I just feel like it's very similar in the sense that now they don't believe you.
Hmm.
They've decided that based on this little bit of information they know about you, that you're supposed to be a particular person. And they've written an entire understanding of who you are. And I don't know if we've dealt with that from the podcast, but I like there's situations in my life, even like in construction, and we had a project that the community felt as though the particular American flag that we hung up was racist, and it turned into a very big thing. Like
Yeah.
the entire community was like appalled by us, and I ended up having to go in there and it, very like professionally and like, hey, like cool it down. And but the point is like they took one person's, hey, I think this flag is racist, and they were like, yep, he's a racist. And then it went on, and I was reading, I'm like, these people have determined who I am
Hmm.
based on this one thing.
You guys are each wearing the same exact shirt. Am I to
We
conclude
court
that you called
we
each other last night to say, "Hey, you're going to wear the
No,
black
like
shirt
10
with the
minutes
craftsman"?
ago.
Mike, I have to say it on air because it was the funniest thing. We never, in 6 years of doing this, we've
I think it's
never
been longer.
almost 7 years. We've never once talked about it.
Hmm.
And I'm setting up in the studio, and Tyler texts me. He goes, "Hey, what are you wearing?" And I knew he wanted to know if I was wearing the shirt. And I start laughing, and our producer Doug, and he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Tyler, for the first time ever, just asked if we were wearing
That's the
what I
first
was
time in
wearing."
my life I've ever asked anyone what they're wearing.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
look,
was like,
man, it's a big day.
It's
You've
Mike
turned the
Rowe.
corner. You know, this
"Yeah,
is
here
you're
we
going to
are."
look back at this, years from now and go, "Yeah, man, that's when we realized it was time for a change."
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The resentment thing, man. You know, I think there's a corollary there with the skills gap,
Oh
and I
yeah.
think right. I mean, I saw it during the lockdown, and it was part of the reason we rebooted uh, Dirty Jobs. And the way I put it to my partner was, I said, it it occurs to me that like the fault in our stars is our tendency to resent those things that we most rely upon.
Yeah.
Why would that? Why would that happen? Like, why would I? Why do I curse the construction workers who slow my commute down? Why
Mhm.
do I? Why did I see neighbors shaking their fists in frustration at the linemen who were up on the pole trying to get the power back on that had been out for 4 days during the fires? You know, why do we? Why do we shake our heads at the plumber when we look at the bill and go like, God damn it, where do you get off charging me that? You know, and
Mhm.
I think part of it is the fact that skilled, real skilled tradespeople, among other things, serve as a reminder of our own incompetence.
Mhm.
And people don't like to be reminded of the fact that they can't do a thing.
Yeah.
And if that thing that they can't do becomes a thing that they rely upon, like the light that magically appears when I flip the switch, or the turds that magically vanish when I flush the toilet. If these things, if I take these things for granted to a degree, uh, and then there's a problem, and I have to wait for the person to come to fix the problem for me, then all that frustration in waiting, I think, speaking only for myself, but I suspect I'm not alone, all that frustration gets manifested in the realization that, you know what? The real problem is I can't do this. I
Mm.
can't build the house without a blueprint. I have to wait for Nick and his team to show up. I have to wait and I have to wait and then I have to pay them. And it's so petty, but it's so real. It could even be with taxes, never mind the skilled trades. Why do I need H&R Block? Why do I need an accountant? Why aren't the taxes simple enough so a lunkhead like me can just sit down and do them? And I think on some level, millions and millions of Americans are surrounded by examples of the expert class standing by to do a thing that we can't do. Now, why can't we do it? That's probably another question, but I think it's because we just don't value it. You know,
Mm.
we took shop class out of high school. Is it any wonder that people are mystified by the trades? At least we used to grow up, you know, exposing our kids to it. It didn't mean that we're going to go into those trades necessarily, but at least they had some optical visual proof that they existed. You know, we just took that whole thing out of the ecosystem. And so now you've just got millions and millions of people who really look at you guys in a way as magicians. That's how I looked at my pop. He was a magician. He woke up clean, he came home dirty. And somewhere during the course of his day, a problem was solved. And how he did it was a source of great mystery to me and wonder, you know? And and happily, you know, my mom reignited all of that decades later with with that question. Anyway, it's just kind of a sidebar on what we resent and
Yeah.
why. And I wonder, is the barrier to recruiting into your industry somehow informed by any of that?
I mean, I've heard you speak a lot about the imbalance between the white collar and blue collar and how there's not much of an overlap and how it needs to be more balanced and how we need to have, you know, white collar people who understand blue collar and vice versa. Um and that essentially we just need a nation that's more fundamentally curious about the world. How do you think that we create more balance between the world we live in so that it's not so polarizing?
Well,
Um,
yeah, that's a great question, Tyler. You know, I think in part we we have to we have to show the Renaissance man. That was a thing. The Renaissance man used to be really a thing, you know, um, and to understand the the polymath, you need to let go of that. Oh, wait, what do you mean he was in the opera? That just you just blew up my whole concept of who he is. That has to go away. So if you're asking, how do you make that go away? Well, we just have to give more examples. We have to see more people who are capable of using both sides of their brain. There was a great moment. Um, I I might have, forgive me if I've told this before, but it's been on my mind a lot during the Republican debate in 2016, I guess. Um, when Marco Rubio was called on to say something. They were talking about, I think, alternative education, college, and so forth. And he said, what this country needs are more welders and fewer philosophers. And the
Mm.
crowd clapped, right? It's big applause line. And I go over to I guess my Facebook page the next day. And I mean, like literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of people saying, hey, this guy's singing your song. Did you see this? And the clip was posted. And I was like, huh, he's actually not singing my song at all. And and it was another example of how codified and how uh, contracted my space has become. And, I hopped on right away. In fact, I think I made a video and I said, look, with respect to Marco, that's not what MicroWorks is about. I don't mean to be out there saying 4-year degrees are bad. I don't mean to be out there suggesting that higher ed has no place in our culture. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that the country's ailing from too few or too many philosophers. The fact is, we do need more welders. But you know what we really need? We need more welders who can talk intelligently about Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and who have taken some time to go down a few YouTube rabbit holes. They don't need to have a sheepskin, but they need to be curious, and they need to have the kind of curiosity that used to be synonymous with the pursuit of a liberal arts degree. The liberal arts degree is now currently available right here on my phone for free to any welder who possesses a modicum of curiosity about all the different disciplines in the world. And conversely, wouldn't it be nice to have some philosophers who could run an even bead, who could talk intelligently with you about the construction of the home that they're paying you to build? Philosophers and social scientists who had a healthy curiosity about the trades as kids, but whose curiosity was encouraged in some way that elevated both sides of the brain. That's why I can't go on Aaron Roberts tonight. I don't have time to tell that story, but that's what the candidates ought to be talking about. It's not, oh, here's what the working class needs to hear. Here's what the soccer moms need to hear. Here's what the college educated set needs to hear. If we do that, if we keep talking to groups instead of people,
Right.
then I just don't think the problems that bedevil your industry are going to get any better until we pull into that some level of personal responsibility and delayed gratification, and initiative and all of that happy horse shit that nobody wants to hear about, that makes me sound like a crazy old rich white dude screaming at the kids to get off his lawn. I get it. I'm not as persuasive, for some reasons that are out of my control. But I got 2,000 people who have gone through MicroWorks, and most of them are in their 20s, and none of them have a 4-year degree, and all of them are working in their chosen field. And many of them are making north of 6 figures. So, yeah, man, my job is to get them out there, get them on the billboard, get them on the
And
podcast.
I think one of the most positive and powerful things that you've done and that I've heard you speak about is, like, one of the big issues in the 70s and the 80s that you spoke about was that we couldn't lift one without putting down the other, right? It was like you have to choose white collar, blue collar. And I'll paraphrase here, but something I heard you say was we did need a good push for more kids to consider a 4-year path, but we were not content to make the case on its merits alone. We had to relegate trades, trade schools, community colleges, etc., to cautionary tales. And I think that that's really important to note. And I think that that's somewhat of the answer as to how we continue to progress and bring people into this trade. We don't need to bring people into the trades by putting down the white collar and the opportunity that being a professional presents. And I think that you made a very strong and powerful point to me that I had never really considered, that this has been going on since the 70s and the 80s and the PR campaigns, where it's like, in order to make white collar or push for white collar, we had to put down blue collar. And I don't think that's the answer on the other side of it. Now that we're trying to build up the blue collar industry and attract people, like, it's not one or the other. It's bringing them together and understanding that there's different paths and they can work in unison. They don't have to be independent of each other.
Well, how do you even think about the color of collars in 2024? I mean, to the idea that a blue collar worker could be using AI
Mhm.
to solve a problem ought to make the point right there. The fact that the person we used to call a mechanic, now an auto technician, I suppose, is looking at the device underneath your hood, which no longer resembles an engine to me anyway. I used to be able to change my oil and maybe even do my own brakes. Today, forget it. that person is like a rocket scientist, some sort of a
Mhm.
software engineer. So the color of collars, I think has probably outlived its usefulness. The real issue in what you've brought up, Tyler, is the power of PR and the corrosive power of bad PR. PR, has a way of just getting relegated into, okay, well, it's just PR. Like, what are you really doing at MicroWorks? Why is it important to challenge the stigmas and the stereotypes and the myths and the misperceptions that keep people out of the trades? Well, because those things are unbelievably persuasive and deeply rooted. Like the number of look at the whole Varsity Blues drama from a few years ago. That all played out among very, very wealthy families whose parents were very, very, very keenly interested in making absolutely sure that their kids not were happy, but went a particular route. It was super important to them. And that desire was mirrored by the private schools from which some of them matriculated and the guidance counselors who pushed and nudged and shoved and discouraged and encouraged, various paths. It's such a Our thumb has been on the scale for so long, and you're so right to point it out that there is nothing written in the stars that says a good and effective PR campaign designed to encourage more kids to become engineers, doctors, lawyers, you know, something funded by the Ivies. That nothing says that you have to pile on and say, and if you don't do it this way, you're going to wind up building houses or turning a wrench or some other fool thing, right? That's a choice. That was like a conscious choice. There's a song from an old musical. I think it's South Pacific called "Carefully Taught." You've got to be carefully taught certain things. That song is about racism and bigotry and so forth and so on. But you also have to be taught as a kid to look down your nose at the trades. You have to be coached. Right? I mean, this is all like the skills gap that we keep talking about. It's not a mystery, really. It's just a function of what we value. And when you look at the PR that's pushed certain forms of education at the expense of trade schools, and when you really look at every other rubric, every other measurable thing around this whole conversation, you can see it's been a failure on your side to present a more persuasive case. And so I've said this to everybody from Ford to Caterpillar to Kimberly Clark, everybody I've been in business with. And look, the good news is, for what it's worth, the tanker is starting to turn around. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this if you're seeing any encouraging signs, green shoots, as they say. But there's been a lot of press. Wall Street Journal just had a big article, Gen Z, the tool belt generation, question mark. And they're looking at a lot of these kids, right, who are making these kinds of choices. Are you seeing that, Nick?
Oh yeah, we had a kid on. I think was it last week or the week before? Young kid, he was like 16 or 17, and my wife actually stumbled across him on a community board, and he was raising money to go to the Skills USA event. So we got in contact with him. We said whatever you need to raise, we'll donate it. Like whatever you need. And we helped fund him to go, and we were like, we also want you on the podcast. And we talked to him, and he talked a lot about how it's, there is this kind of resurgence. And I think about probably 6-7 years ago, it was, we need to create awareness for the trades, and that was like the campaign: find home building, keep craft alive. Like there's this huge push to like just create awareness, like that, hey, this, guys, this is good, this is good, like stop thinking it's bad. And in Tyler and I's, school days in high school and college, like it wasn't that way, and that was what we were trying to counteract. Mike, I think I told you, but like in high school, I applied to go to my vocational school, and I was so nervous. And I went down to my guidance counselor, and I asked him, does he think I'll get in? And he goes, you? He goes, dude, all the bad kids get in. You're fine.
Yeah.
And I remember like feeling terrible about that. And I guess where I'm going with this is 5-6 years ago, that was the message. We need to create encouragement. We need to get people interested in the trades. But simultaneously, while we were doing that, we were removing every piece of education. One trade was being removed for the vocational school year after year after year. And I remember talking to we had a kid that worked for us who was in high school. He was on his co-op, and he was from my high school. And I was asking him, like, is that shop still there? And he goes, oh no, they combined those two and now made them one. I'm like, what about this one? He goes, no, those are combined. That one's combined with this. I'm like, they were combining machine shop and metal shop and cabinet making and house carpentry and auto body and auto mechanic. I'm like, they're so different. And
Yeah.
how do you learn that if you're in two totally different aspects of the trade? And fast forward to today, it's like now we have people in our inbox constantly like, hey, I went into a quote unquote white collar job, which I agree, like white collar, blue collar. Now there's this whole like generation of people that don't have a collar at all that make a ton of money. They don't fall into either group. But hey, I went into this white collar job. I'm just not feeling fulfilled. I want to come work for you. And we have these conversations week after week. It's like, that's fine, but you have no skill set. We're more than like, if we have the capacity, we will teach you. Many of people in our industry are very small, sub 5 people companies. And to put training in place is a huge expense to them.
Mm-hmm.
So now these guys are coming in, and it's like they're going from making 6+ figures a year to then being at a slightly above minimum wage as a floor sweeper, hopefully to become an apprentice, hopefully to become and grow. And now I think in 24, especially at this last builder show, now my view is that now we're in a race to see what we can do faster. Can we create technology that will replace the 4 remaining jobs that are retiring faster than we can train 4 more people? And there's an argument to both sides, and I'm not on either side. I think that there's a case for both.
Sure.
And I think but the at the base, and you said that, like, you've been talking about this, and when we last talked about it, you said something that I've always kind of referenced, is that the welder versus like a white collar job or blue collar, it wasn't that we needed one or the other. It was that there was equal respect. And you use the word respect, and I remember that being like something that stuck to me, is like that we've gotten there. We've gotten to this. We've gotten to the place where trades are respected. I don't think I can't. It's obviously not 100%, but I think in our generation and Gen Z, like, there's this respect and awareness that these are all equal career paths. But it's how do I do it?
That's great. I mean, look, that's the first step. But again, it's really difficult to measure because it's happening in real time under a lot of different circumstances in a lot of different places, right? I mean, geographically, I can tell you, I was in Oklahoma a couple months ago. In fact, the guy who's on my podcast next week was a complete accident. I ran into him in the middle of Oklahoma. His name is Brent Haken. You'll love him. He is the state director of the CTE program in all of Oklahoma. And I was out there filming this project with Continental Energy. And, you can imagine how many jobs exist in the energy field that require hands-on skilled training. So this year, in the course of doing that campaign, I said, look, is there a way we can kind of incorporate a trade conversation into these materials? And they said, yeah, why not? We'd love to do that. Anyhow, they say you should film in a place called Central Tech. It's in the middle of the state, and they train everything from nursing to truck drivers to just about any skill you would need on the oil field, or in gas production. anywhere in the country. So I said, let's go there. Guys, it was unbelievable. I've been in a lot of trade schools. Some are better than others for different reasons. This thing is the most no BS, hands-on. We're going to teach you how this works, right? And what's so interesting about this guy, Haken, Brent, is that as I was interviewing him, so first and foremost, he's a farmer. Like, he grew up on like a wheat farm, spent all of his teenage years backbreaking farming work. Then he became a teacher. Then he became a principal. Then he became a supervisor. And now I don't even think he's 40 years old, maybe early 40s, and he's the state director of all CTE. While we're standing there in the lobby talking about all the trouble in the world, and he's explaining why his school is different, the school buses start showing up. 1, 2, 5, 10, 12, 17, all packed with kids. This is 2 in the afternoon, I guess. So all over this part of the state, high schools let out, buses fill up, and hundreds of kids descend on this place to learn how to weld and to learn how to steam fit and to take their nursing programs. So it's like, okay, we took shop class out of high school, but in some parts of the country, it's come back on steroids. And this is one of them. This is a place where any kid in any nearby high school, and by nearby I mean like 30 miles, they come here to get trained. And as I'm standing there watching this happen, filming for this other project, as soon as I got finished, I said, hey, man, can we just sit down and talk? I won't keep you more than an hour, but I just want to share this story from you firsthand on my podcast. And of course, he said, yeah. And I said, before we start, let me just ask, why are you saying yes so quickly? And he said, because PR is the most important element of what we're talking about. If we don't challenge the stigma, stereotypes, myths, misperceptions, none of this money, none of this effort, none of it is going to matter. We have to do something that affirmatively shifts the conversation on the topic at the kitchen table, the dining room table, between parents and kids. If we don't, we fail, period.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. Obviously, the PR, but I think that so much is getting rid of that resentment. Like, this is being done in a community where when something happens or there's a need for a trade specific, like help from somebody within the trades, there's not resentment there, and they understand and they appreciate the value of that. And I think that, like, creating the infrastructure and the trade schools is one hurdle that we need to understand how to solve. But I think on the other end of the spectrum, it's getting rid of that resentment that, hey, my roof's leaking, I'm pissed off now that I have to call a roofer because I can't fix this myself. Where it's like, hey, I know a guy who's a roofer and I'm going to be able to have him come fix this. He'll treat me well, and I'm going to be able to help provide for his family by doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it goes back to the challenge of good PR. There are very few topics that really do work on a national level. Like, I think we've talked about the Keep America Beautiful campaign and the Weeping Indian on the side of the road, and how crazy effective that was back in the mid 70s.
Yeah.
Because the country had a collective problem with littering, and we needed to do something to change those attitudes. I argue a lot that the same thing has to happen here. But to your point, it has to happen more in some places than others.
Yeah.
In this particular place in Oklahoma, we can start with a different kind of conversation. You might have a very, very different challenge in Brooklyn, or Phoenix, right? It's really, God, this is probably a dangerous analogy, but I'll just say it because we've been talking an hour, 36 minutes. No one's listening anymore anyway. It's like Black Lives Matter. When that came out, and when I started seeing that everywhere, and then I started listening to the fights between people who are saying, well, wait a minute, all lives matter. And okay, well, you're racist for saying that because you don't understand why we're saying this. And And I was like, oh my God, these two sides are talking past each other faster than I've ever seen anything devolve. And part of the problem was the country is full of people who already know that Black Lives Matter. And those people resent being told something that they already know as if they didn't know it. And they wanted to say something about that. But when they said something, it came out all wrong. Now, there are people in the country too who probably need to be reminded of that fact, but how do you find them and deliver that message in a targeted way? PR can't do that. That's why any slogan, any bromide, any platitude, no matter how well intended, is going to wind up reaching a lot of people who don't need to hear it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the people in that part of Oklahoma probably don't need to be reminded to hug your lineman or high five your plumber. They get it. They're the fourth largest producer of energy in the country. They know where their bread's buttered. So, how do you launch a national campaign that's relevant to everyone? That's what I'm wrestling with right now. And really, it's a fun challenge. And I can't say too much yet because A, I don't want to jinx it, and B, the deals aren't done. But I've heard in the last 6 weeks, a number of, I'll just call them gajillionaires because they got way more than $1 billion, way more than that. People whose names have reached out to say, what can we do here about this? Because you're just MicroWorks, but you're the most robust trade school scholarship fund in the country. You've given away more money than, you're not on anybody's list, but nobody's given away more money for the trades. Nobody's noisier about this. What's it take to just 10x everything you're doing through better PR, even more money for scholarships? And they're fascinating conversations, guys, because I don't really know the answer, and I don't know what the market can actually, like, if somebody gives me $50 million and says, go out and change the way America thinks about the trades, I have some ideas about what might work, but I don't really know. I don't really know how to measure that. That whole business with Keep America Beautiful, that took 12 years to break the country's attitude toward littering. I have no idea how long it'll take to do this, but I am encouraged.
I think a surefire way would be to certainly be part of Modern Craftsman podcast.
Oh, I mean, clearly.
Like, we don't need all 50 million, but
but a sizable chunk, I would think.
I think it would help.
Well, for starters, just imagine the wardrobe you two could embrace. Like,
he's got a point.
I mean, I'm thinking, and I don't want to overreach, but I'm thinking shirts with collars, maybe even long sleeves, actual buttons, hoods, maybe even a zipper. I mean, Tyler, it's endless.
Zipper, man, we're going from buttons to zipper. That's a very abrupt jump.
All right, sorry, Velcro, right in between, a little connective tissue. Hey, speaking of t-shirts, this guy would be a great guest for you too. The Montana Knife Company. Do you know Josh Smith?
We do not.
But we can get him on.
He's a tradesman. He is a tradesman, and he, out of thin air, has built, I think, if they're not the most respected knife company in the country now, they're really close to it. They are meticulous.
What's his name? Josh
Smith.
Very
MKC.
Common name.
Yeah, he'll be on in 2 weeks.
Cool.
Great conversation, and just amazing knives. He gave me a cleaver and a chef's knife that I think they're like laser guided, man. They just glide through meat. That's cool. Creepy. Yeah. It's actually so sharp it's scary.
Check it out.
In all seriousness, Mike, we started this podcast over 6 years ago because we're all alone, right? We all feel alone. We all internalize what we're dealing with. And we started having these conversations. Social media started opening us up to the idea of collaborating and talking to the guy next door to you building. And it has evolved into this podcast and this platform of just having a conversation like we did today. And, you talk about micro works and your involvement in the trades, and, kudos to you and your team for putting that together. But that is exactly what we are here and trying to do, is to continue to encourage, everyone. The majority of our audience is probably very much the guy that's been in business for 5 and less years, and they're trying to navigate the balance of running a business, making money, and keeping their family happy, and sometimes inserting mental health and physical health into that conversation.
Yeah.
But it's now, especially after a couple weeks ago when we had this kid on, it's like, I really want to have more of these kids, and I will say, and Tyler, I think you were the one that like commended him for it when he got on that podcast. And I mean, we talked for an hour and a half, and that dude was confident. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew why. He knew his
Yeah.
motivation today and the reason for his motivation tomorrow.
He even
And
brushed his teeth.
he did. He told
He told us he brushed his teeth for the podcast. We were like,
Wow.
well, I don't know if you had to do that, but
It's
appreciate it.
commitment. Yeah, you got to admire that kind of diligence.
But
Get his name to Chuck. Honestly,
we will.
look, I'm
We
going
will.
to do the same thing. In fact, I would put it out there to your 2 or 3 listeners, or 2 or 300,000, whichever it is. I need their help, and I need your help too. If this is going to happen for real, it is going to be kind of that 1,000 points of light thing that Bush
Yeah.
got so much shit for, but that's what's going to do it. It's going to be a bunch of jagged little pills coming together to make a more persuasive case. And
Mm-hmm.
look, one of the gajillionaires, old guy. Oh God, I hope he can do something before he kicks, because he's up there. But he said, Mr. Rowe, if I just went ahead and wrote you a check right now, right? What would you do? What would the message be? And I said, well, part of it would just be a tap on the country's shoulder to say, look, 5 retiring, 2 coming in, not sustainable. It's real. I can prove it. First of all, just frame the problem. But the more persuasive thing is going to be to circle back to the 2,000 people that we've assisted, and the many people that are either in your audience or your audience knows. We have to put those people on the covers of magazines, or maybe the back cover, or somewhere in there, full page ads. We have to put them on billboards. We have to put them on T-shirts. Instead of saying Craftsman or Montana Knife Company, put the face right there, man. Right? We have to put them on podcasts, and we got to put them on the TV. If Tunnels to Towers can do it, if the United Way can do it, if Mike Lindell can do it, if he can sell me one more My Pillow, right? I'm talking about like the ubiquity of potentially me, although it's not about me, but somebody needs to introduce the country to the evidence that demands a verdict. And the evidence is the kid you just described, and thousands of others like him. We just have to carpet bomb the country with again and again and again. 22 years old, no college debt, 120 grand a year. Living a balanced life. First kids on the way. Next, we have to like enthusiastically and unapologetically show people that mastering a skill that's in demand, combined with some semblance of a decent work ethic, is still a viable path to prosperity. And we have to overwhelm the country with the undeniable proof of the claim.
That's what it is. We have to tell that story and create that balance with everyone.
Yep.
Which is,
I love that idea.
I mean, it's been a struggle. It's difficult, but I think that we're moving in that direction. I just right now feel that there needs to be more infrastructure in place, more funding, and also just like the mindset has to shift.
Yeah. Well, look, I I'm as Clint Eastwood said, a man's got to know his limitations. I think I know mine. I know when I feel a little wobbly, but the big lesson from Dirty Jobs was the unintended consequence of that show. And
Mhm.
yeah, it was a big deal for a long time, and toilets blew up, and I got to violate every barnyard animal there is. I mean, like that show
Worth it.
was just a spectacle of turds and sperm and
Again, making your
misadventures.
mom so proud.
I, dude, believe me, we still laugh about it. Talk about work ethic. Her fourth book is coming out. Her first, she published when she was 80. Now she's 86. Number 4 is coming out. So she can give as good as she gets. But,
Where are we going to find it?
oh, it'll be, everywhere in October. It's called Oh No, Not the Home: Observations and Confessions of a Grandmother in Transition. And it is freaking funny.
That's
Um,
amazing.
But my point is, and this is where I got to land the plane because I think I'm supposed to do something in 5 minutes. I know I got more FaceTime calls coming in. um, the point is, for all its Emmys, by the way, can you see my Emmy award okay back there?
You say it.
I
Get a
just
nice
realized,
snapshot of it.
dude, look at this thing. This is the douchiest thing. I keep telling myself I got to get rid of this thing, but yeah.
You should turn it into your microphone.
You know what? By the way, man, I don't know if you've ever seen, like, there's so much fine print on the bottom of an Emmy. Like,
I have not.
no, it's, you know what?
Do not share this on a podcast.
Warning. Yeah. Anyway, the point
Puts it
is,
on the floor.
Dirty Jobs, for all of its accolades and all the great things that happened to me as a result of that in the world of entertainment, the letters I get today from people who are in the trades, who grew up watching that show, and who saw something that sparked an interest from watching that show that put them on a path that either led them into construction or any number of things. That's amazing. And that I can't take a victory lap for. I can't take credit for any of that because I didn't start it with that in mind. But it goes back to the PR thing. It goes back to sometimes the thing that moves the needle is not the thing you're thinking of. It's not the consequence you intended. But Dirty Jobs, on the one hand, launched 38 shows and really did change the way cable TV looked. But more importantly, it inspired millions of kids to say to their parents, that it was like a portal. It was like a look into
Yeah.
350 different jobs. It's the shallow end of the pool. You just get a glimpse at it. But I guarantee you, the number of veterinarians, the number of rod busters, steel workers, welders who are walking around today because they saw a version of their life on a TV show that was born in a sewer because a smart Aleck's mother told him to get down there and do something that looked like work. You can't script that thing. Not in a million years. And I don't care how many blank squares you have on your calendar. Nobody would ever think to fill one with that. That stuff just happens.
Well, I definitely appreciate all of your time, Mike. Everything that you've done, and whether it was intentional or not, or you just want to remain humble about what you've done, your life, your career, what you continue to do, the stance that you take has been a huge impact on myself, a huge impact on multiple generations, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find as many people that have done as much for the trades as you have. Again, whether that was intentional or not. And if that puts too much pressure on you, I apologize, but
Yeah, it's a lot.
I know that we're grateful for it.
That's a lot, man. I don't know that I can handle that, but I appreciate it. Um, I would just say in closing that anybody, look, you guys are on the front line of it. I'm actually on the other side in the sense that I'm the addict. I am addicted. I'm addicted to this house that I live in and the fact that it doesn't leak. I'm addicted to smooth roads. I'm addicted to affordable energy. I'm addicted to, you know, reliable runways and planes that do what they're supposed to do. I'm addicted to indoor plumbing. And I would say to anyone who shares my addiction to those things, you have skin in this game and you have to be paying attention, because it's no longer a question of how long do you know, how much should we pay a plumber, or what happens to the company who can't hire plumbers. It's not that anymore. Today, it's how long do you want to wait for the plumber, the electrician? How long do you want to wait for your house to be built? 5 leave, 2 come in. Somebody find an alarm and ring it.
Yep. It's true.
Good to see you, Mike.
We appreciate your time.
What do I have to do to get one of those shirts? Or do they even make them in my size anymore?
Might be able. Knicks are not going to fit you, that's for sure.
What's that supposed to mean? We wear the same size.
That thing is tight.
That is a little snug.
Nick painted his on.
God, really, you look like you threaded a needle with a sausage with that thing. Amazing.
I'm going to take that as a compliment.
I would.
What size are you? Large?
European Husky.
XL?
No, I think I'm a large now. I'm down to 195 thanks to the rucking.
All right.
Yeah.
How tall are you?
I'm 6 feet tall.
6 feet
All right,
tall.
so I'm wearing a large. I'm 180, 6 feet tall.
I'm wearing a large. I'm 6'3", 195.
There you go. So
6'3", 195. Good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
we're all
great.
painting t-shirts.
Large,
on.
extra large. We should have both. We can send both. You can see which one fits better.
Chuck's a XXX. I'm just a large.
See if we can make that happen. Maybe we can give you 2 XLs and we can stitch them together.
Hey man, look, if this cuts into your wardrobe allowance, don't do it. I'm saying,
it's all right. We got a bunch of money coming our way.
Want to buy an Emmy?
How much? It depends. It might be a write-off.
Sure. Hey man, I actually value this one even more. I got this from the Tuttle twins. It's a participation trophy.
Oh, awesome! That's awesome.
I came in 4th place.
All right.
I love the captions. And congratulations, Mike Rowe. You worked on a cartoon.
It's amazing.
All right, guys, that was fun. Good luck.
Yeah,
say
we
hi
appreciate it.
All 300,000 of your listeners.
I will. I'll connect with Chuck. We'll get some of those kids on the podcast. That would be great, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Good.